Hi, welcome to Healing Humanity. My name is Dina. Healing Humanity. I don't know where I ever came up with that idea. It seems a little strange sometimes when I think about it. So, this last week, I have encountered several creators that, I like listening to. I enjoy their material and the things that they share and their points of view on, various different things. But this last week has been different. This last week has been a lot of a lot of negative stuff. I heard one creator talk about letting go of toxic positivity. Um, Others talking about how we need to be more powerful and stand up and fight. And when I first started this journey, and the history of my family has been um, dealing with things with yelling and sometimes violence. Um, I knew by looking at the way that my family was, family that I actually didn't grow up with, but knew about. So biological family that thank God I didn't get raised by, but have the same tendencies as they did. When I think about that, um, I think in the very beginning of this journey, and it's been so long, that sometimes it's hard to remember, what was happening in the beginning when I first started. And what people don't realize is that I went from being that angry adult, the one that held grudges, the one that made herself sick by holding on to things that I didn't need to hold on to, by sometimes judging others too harshly, or not even others, but even situations, judging them too harshly. Without any information, without any proof, without any conversation, I just made a snap judgment and moved on and never thought twice about it. But when God circumcises your heart, things change. And you have to start taking a hard look at yourself. It's not like you can just um, be awoken to the world in a different manner and think that you can stay the same. You can't. I had to take a hard look at who I was, who I had become, and, you know, knowing I couldn't go down that same path, and I definitely didn't want to go down the same path as my ancestors had gone, you know, um, because in the situation that I was in, it probably could have ended up like that. I had, like I said, I wasn't raised by these folks, but they're my blood. It runs in the family. Um, there had been talks in material that I found where, my father had gone to jail, um, partially for drugs, but he had gone for other things that he had done, and it was just kind of a troublemaker, and dealt with things through brute force and coercion and anger. And it was not a good life for him. It didn't end well for him, and it wasn't a good life for him overall. Sad, really, because when I did finally meet him, he seemed like a decent enough guy, but deep down, he was troubled. And then also, my great grandfather had found himself coming to America. Um, found some work, probably not legal work, who knows, um, and found himself in a situation. He was bootlegging, um, and I only know this because of court documents. And so he was apparently bootlegging, and a guy came over to buy a bottle, and had an encounter or a situation with my, I think, great grandmother. It might have been, yeah, I think it's the great or great great. I think it's the great grandmother. I guess from what I understand, there was a potential pass made at my great grandmother, and my great grandfather found out about this and was not happy, obviously, and chased him out of the house. Well, it didn't end there. He continued to chase him, and he chased him so far, and got a hold of him, and he wound up accidentally killing him. So he went to jail. So when you know, and based on your own history, you have tendencies to get out of sync with normal ways of being. Like, that you can't handle life in the same manner anymore. You cannot be angry. You cannot. I remember when I was really young, really, really young, I would see like red, and that's all I saw. That is not okay, and that is not normal. And that took a lot of work to get over that. And then, when I found myself in these negative situations, one after another, and all kinds of tower moments occurring all around me in every aspect of my life, I knew that I had two paths that I could go on. I could continue down the path that I had always led and allowed my emotions to continue to control my life. I could allow my feelings to guide me and lead me in probably into a massive spiral. Or I could listen to the God within me who's telling me to let it go. Give it to him. Give it to God. Let the powers of God change me. I knew by reading the Bible that if I didn't choose that path, it was going to be harder to go back to him. I also knew by reading, I have it pulled up here. It was where is it? Hold on. Romans 12:2, where it highlights the importance of transforming your life by the renewal of your mind rather than conforming to the world. And I knew that I had to do that. I have always wanted to change. I've always been the kind of person, from a very young age, reading and listening to tapes and records and so forth on self-help, right? Grew up listening to Napoleon Hill and Tony Robbins and all of the, the giant names in that era. The one thing I noticed was there was no women. I had no women to look up to. So these are the folks that I aspired to be like and to mimic my life by. And it got me pretty far, as far as listening to these folks and heeding their warnings and adapting some of their trains of thought into my life, right? It got me, I think business wise, it did well for me. But personally, I was still holding on to those moments where I would lose my temper. And I wanted, once I received God, I wanted to give more of him to people. So toxic positivity, I just can't wrap my head around that. I find it so disturbing that we can make something that's supposed to be good into something bad. Where do you get that? Where do you say, how can those two words be meshed together? Especially coming from where somebody comes from, right? When somebody could have gone down a dark path very easily, especially given the situations that I was put in. Various different situations. Every portion of my life had been attacked or derailed for various different things that I was doing, things that I had done for years, 30 some odd years, were changed and destroyed, honestly. And so when you talk about toxic positivity, you have to understand where sometimes that comes from. You see, when we receive God in our heart, we're supposed to change. And it did change me. It changed me from a just occasional raging asshole to somebody who's actually caring and loving and wants to be kind to people, wants to embrace the world, because I had lost hope in that. I was just living my life every day, grinding just like the rest of us, right? Just grinding through every day, go home and, crash out. I didn't want that life. I didn't want to be that person. And many of us don't. Many of us don't want to live with no hope, with no joy, with no love. Love for ourselves, hope for ourselves, joy within ourselves. The ability to just be alone and be okay. The ability to understand our own thoughts and be able to work through them, be able to accept them, be able to accept ourselves. Doesn't that sound great? And I really feel like, it's not that I don't have sinful thoughts, or it's not that I don't have moments where I have to fight, some form of frustration. But really, at the end of the day, when you are walking with God, you don't need any of that. It doesn't even play a part in your life. And for me, especially, because I knew what was a potential in my bloodline. And I was not going to have that. Not at all. No more. Right? Enough people have suffered. Enough loss has occurred in this family, in this craziness, that it didn't need to happen anymore. And it was going to stop with me. And I hope it does. I do. I hope my children and my children do well. And I hope my grandchildren do well also. And future generations, to many generations to come. I just think that it's really, really important to take ownership for our own, the way that we show up, right, in the world, and take ownership of our own feelings and work through them without looking at somebody else and blaming them, or without trying to control a narrative that you really don't have any control over. It's okay to let things go instead of trying to force an outcome. And I think that when we walk with God, the most important and the hardest thing to do is to trust that he will work things out on your behalf. And that sometimes, like I've said before, sometimes that takes longer than it does, to try to do things yourself. But if God is really calling you, he's not going to let you work it out yourself. He is going to make sure that you know, and that everybody else knows, that he's the one that worked it out for you. And it may be through other people, probably will be through other people. But at the end of the day, it's going to be God that does the miracle for you. And that's where I'm at, right? So I don't think that there's such a thing as toxic positivity. I don't think that there's something, as crazy as that. I can't see those two words together. And if you mean that that's the case because somebody's always positive, people do videos on here and they don't always share everything. I've gone through so many different situations, and if I listed them all, you would be shocked. Literally shocked. But I don't let those things stop me. There was one year, a long, long time ago, where I almost lost my child, my youngest child. It was such a terrible, traumatic time. She was born and she had a physical disability, which actually saved her life. But she was born with a small physical disability that was able to be fixed later on. But at the time, was a stress for her father and I, and it was difficult to know what the right things to do were, and she was eating like around the clock because um, of the problem she had. She had a cleft palate, and during that period, you know, we're managing a business. We were plowing snow, doing all these things. My ex-husband was, and I went with him to help him and be with him. But he was also working full time outside the home, and he went out one night shortly after she got well. She came home, but was still a sick baby at first, and she was sick. She got RSV, and I don't know if you know about that, but it is it's like a cough in adults, a real deep cough. It usually happens in the middle of winter. It's called RSV, and she got that, and then she came home, and she had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. So, on top of everything else, we're trying to drive all these miles, and we're staying in Ronald McDonald House, and we're doing all kinds of things to save her and help her. He went out one night after she came home, shortly after she came home, and I think it was within 2 weeks of her being home. He went out one night and never came home, or he didn't for quite a while. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks and had, it was just such a horrible time. And he wound up accidentally taking somebody's life with his vehicle. He had been drinking and driving. And I knew, you know, I can go deeper into that, but honestly, she was in the hospital for 2 weeks. She came home for 2 weeks. We're trying to learn the new schedule with her and try to figure out how to properly feed her and help her thrive, and still had two other kids. And in the midst of all of this, trying to find normal with them and people coming in and out and helping us, thank God. But and then 2 weeks after she gets home, he's gone, and I'm left with all of this around me, not knowing how to function. And I remember one afternoon, I was told to go lay down, and I did. I went into my bedroom, and I just lost it. But then I knew that I had to pick it up. I had to figure it out. I couldn't just let the world take over and take me down, or my children. You know, did I always do the right things? No, I didn't. Was I always kind? Nope, I wasn't. Did I always do my best? Yep, I sure did. And I think that at that moment, I could, I remember, I remember just sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm like dealing with all this paperwork and all of these things, and a business, and my in-laws, and a big house that I had moved into, and the car, and just so many things. And I remember sitting there, and I just wanted to give up, and I was so tired. But I saw my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, and I think my father-in-law came in, and I could tell that he felt bad that I was having to deal with all of that. And just by knowing that somebody saw it was really enough for me to just keep pushing. Um, I didn't need any speech or anything to uplift me, or a hug or anything like that. Just the knowing that people saw it was really kind of enough. And it kept me fighting, and it kept me knowing that this was a turning point, right? We're all brought to crossroads in our lives, and I was at one at that point, and I could either turn and um, give up, or be negative and just let that kind of guide me through the rest of my life, or I could just keep fighting and keep fighting and keep fighting no matter what happened. And that's how I've dealt with my life, is I've just tried to continue that fight no matter what happens, no matter where I'm at. And I try to stay positive, because it's all about how I feel about what the situation is, how I feel about it, what I think about it, and what I'm going to allow to continue, right? I'm not one to, I'm not much for taking medicine, right? So I'm not much for staying in a negative situation either. You know, I'm not going to I'm not going to cover up my situation, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like taking medicine seems to me like sometimes it's just a cover up of whatever else is going on underneath the surface. I like to get to the bottom of it, and I like to figure it out and get rid of it completely. And so I wasn't going to take some medicine and just stay negative or stay in a funk or allow any of these situations to take my ability to be happy away from me. That was my choice. These situations happened, yes, but they weren't something that I caused, and I wasn't going to just roll over on, you know, with this and just let it take over my life. And there's so many other things that have happened over the years, but you know, that was probably one of the biggest ones where I really found the beginnings of having to make a choice on whether I was going to be positive or negative in my life. And I had always been a kind person, but I decided that I needed to focus on the positive and focus on the good to be able to um, continue. And I did. And if that's toxic, so be it. I'd rather be toxic positivity and survive with a smile on my face than to allow the world and other people and traumas and anything get over on me. You know, will I always be like that? I don't know, but I am now, and I have been for a long time. And I would encourage you to try it. A little toxic positivity can be good for you. So until next time, keep healing, keep being positive, and, you know, just try to strengthen your mind and care for yourself. We all need to do that.